everybody. This is the Menorah Podcast, the 49th episode of the Menorah Podcast. And my name is Brady Henderson, and I serve as the senior pastor of the First Baptist Church in Gaston, South Carolina. And I am one of the hosts of this podcast. The other is my dear friend Allen, and he's here with me today for the 49th episode.
Wow, it's hard to believe we got 49 in the can.
Well, not yet. We got to get 49 today, but we're right there and coming up on our year anniversary of Menorah. So that's coming up, and so that's pretty exciting. But we kind of want to do something a little different for February with you guys on the Menorah Podcast. If you, last night, if you were able to grab the copy of the newsletter, or if you went by the pastor's table and got my copy of the Brady blog, you were able to see kind of what we were planning on talking about. So I'm not sure how many we're going to crank out, but our goal is to get 5 this episode, and the 4 remaining after it will be about the same thing. So February, for those that might not be aware, is actually my 4-year anniversary as your pastor. February the 21st of 2021, I was voted as your pastor. Came and I preached a trial sermon on 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18. I don't believe we have that on YouTube, so praise the Lord for that. It wasn't my best, but the Lord used it, and we had a great day that day. Less than 80 people were here.
I actually have that packaged on my computer if you're interested in putting it up.
Nope, not interested. Go ahead and delete it. How about that? Here, let me get my wallet out. Make sure you delete that. No, I feel for all the people that were here early on in my ministry when I was kind of learning how to preach. I think I'd only preached a total of 10 or 15 sermons before I came here, so it was a lot to try to learn how to preach with the congregation and everything. But yeah, we just want to take the next few episodes and kind of take a different approach. In today's episode, I'm just going to kind of give an overview of the last 4 years, kind of my take on it. And then the next 4 episodes, we're going to go year by year. And Alan's going to interview me on some questions and ask me some things, and also give his perspective on the last 4 years. Starting next week's episode in February, first Thursday of February, we'll talk about 2021, following Thursday 2022, then 2023, and then we'll talk about 2024 on the last one. So hopefully you'll tune into all these. I think it'll be interesting for you just to kind of hear, especially for those that weren't here in the beginning, which is a lot of you, because there was around 80 people that were here that day that voted on me. A lot of them were in the cars because COVID was still pretty predominant at that time, and so we had very few people in the sanctuary that I actually got to lay eyes on, and that's all I got to lay eyes on was their eyes, because they had a face mask covering everything else, which I totally understood at that time and even today. And so it's really cool. And the sad thing about that, Alan, the 80 I started with, 54 of them have gone to be with the Lord. So only a few of our listeners are going to remember back from the very beginning.
Yeah,
so
that's over half.
Yeah, exactly. Well over half. So I do think that this is going to be good, a good mini series of the podcast. Just kind of let people know what's been going on the last 4 years. February 21st, I'll celebrate 4, and on February 22nd, I'll start year 5, which is pretty hard to believe, but I'm pretty excited about that. It's been a good 4 years. I've loved it. I don't want to get all into 2021, how it started. We'll save that for next Thursday. But if you read the Brady blog for this month in our church newsletter, I'm going to kind of share a few thoughts from that, kind of expound upon that. My entire newsletter article this month was about the 4-year anniversary. You might say, well, why is he making a big deal about this? Because 4 years isn't 40, 4 years isn't 15, 4 years isn't even 10. And I understand that. But I think one reason that it means so much to me is because I remember, and you remember, Alan, how much of a move of God it was for this to occur. So for me, it's a celebration and a time of remembrance every year for what God did with all of the things that we had stacked against us with this. And shame on me, but we really should have interviewed Randy today, who was a huge part of that. He was the search person of the committee that brought me here, and he faced a lot of spiritual warfare, and those on the committee did, but he knew that this was God's will, and this is kind of how it happened. So I also think it's important for another reason, The average pastor in the Southern Baptist Convention stays at their church 2 years and 3 months. So I think anytime you get past 2 years, I think you need to start celebrating a little bit, not take things for granted, and be thankful that it's a good fit. And I think it's a good fit. If you might be listening, might not think it is, and that's your opinion that you're allowed to have. But my opinion is that it's going well and that it's a great fit on both sides, I think. I'll get into a little bit later on in the episode because the person that became the pastor here in 2021 is not the same person here in 2025. I'm not that same kid. Hopefully, I'd like to say I'm not a kid anymore, but I don't know about that. I don't know if I'll ever fully grow out of that. But it's really special when I kind of think about this. And, this year I get to begin year 5 here. And year 5 is going to be great and it's going to be a big deal. But what I want to talk about in this episode, kind of the 4 years at large, is over the last 4 years. And I'm going to get your perspective in a second from the outside looking in, even though you're on the inside. But from my perspective, I have been able to grow up here as far as my ministry is concerned. I know I grew up as a kid at a church in the upstate. But what I mean, if you look at my ministry long term, these first 4 years here have been a really big growing up time for me. Just a time that I've been able to grow up. This church, when I came here in 21, I was still a college graduate. So in August of that year, they got to watch me graduate. Don't know. I remember graduation Sunday that year. I don't know if they've ever here had a pastor preach in his undergrad, not seminary, his undergrad garb, and I preached in my cap and gown. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do remember
I
that.
preached in my cap and gown. And
to my knowledge, that is the only time that has happened.
And so, and you guys got to support me, and you did support me, and you watched me through that. You guys have been so gracious to me. You watched me conduct my first funeral as well as my first wedding. Now, if you would have told me 4 years ago, okay, I did my first wedding after I'd been here like 3 days or something like that. If you would have told me, okay, you're going to do 54 funerals in the next 4 years, I probably would have resigned that Sunday and left for good. I'm not saying I don't enjoy funerals, but I had no idea how to do a funeral. Okay, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know all of the unwritten rules. I didn't know all that stuff. And so you guys were so patient with me. You guys watched me preach some of my first sermons here. I wrote in the Brady blog in parentheses, God bless you for that. Those were rough. You watched me make a lot of mistakes I still make to this day. You watched me attempt, because I haven't fully learned it yet, but I think this church really watched me attempt to learn what it means to fall and to fail, and then to be able to get back up again. And so I think that was a really big deal for me. This church has watched me get engaged to my favorite person on the planet, my bride. This church watched my sister several years ago compete in a state championship in basketball here in Columbia. You guys watched me begin and develop our new members class, and I've brought many of you through that. For those that don't know, that new members class was not here in the beginning. We had to kind of form that and get that going. You watched us get married in 2022. You guys have watched me become a husband. And whoever would have thought that I would be a dog dad, but here I am with my son to the right of me. You've watched me become a dog dad. You've watched me start, continue, and hopefully, I pray this year you'll get to see me graduate from the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary with my Master's of Divinity. You guys as a church walked with me when my grandfather went to be with the Lord. Over 50 of you attended his funeral when I conducted that in the upstate, the hardest funeral I've ever done. And this church has loved my family, even though my family is 150 miles away. My grandma gets cards, handwritten cards from people in this church every week. Somebody different every week. And that really means a lot to me, that they care for her, which is JoJo, by the way. As a church, you watched Hannah make a career change. People don't know this, but Hannah started out as a teacher, and then, of course, now she works at the Lexington Baptist Association and the South Carolina Baptist Convention in the area of communications. And so she sought a lot of advice from people that she knows and trusts inside this church. And so that meant a lot to her to have people come alongside her and help her to make that decision. There have been a lot of firsts here. You guys watched us buy our first home. Allen here and Mike, who's not with us today, but these two guys put my bookshelf in my study upstairs, and you might not think that's a big deal, but I think it took about 6 or 7 hours, and it was a huge deal. And I appreciate y'all for that. You guys, have seen so many firsts, and Lord willing, there's still going to be more firsts, I believe. And I can confidently say that I feel like I'm a better person today simply because God allowed me to serve here and that He brought me at such a time as this. That means a lot to me. There's so many of you, I won't name names because I'll forget somebody, that have invested in me spiritually, emotionally, physically, and mentally. And I truly believe that many of the lessons that I've learned so far here at our church are going to stick with me for the rest of my ministry. I will remember them. Our kids, I will tell them the stories of my first church, possibly my only church. I don't know yet. That's yet to be seen. But I will tell them the stories of the beginning days, and they're probably going to look at me and Hannah and say, y'all were crazy. Y'all pastored a church when you were 21 and 22 and not married and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going to be like, yeah, son, why don't you come over here? I'll show you the battle scars I got to prove it, right? And go through that with him. But yeah, it's just been awesome. It's been an awesome 4 years. And like I said, Alan's going to get more into 2021 next week and then the following years after that. But any general thoughts or questions? I mean, I've just gave a quick summary, but I really mean it. I think, and I don't know when, if God were to ever move me from here, I want to be able to confidently say, I can't say it right now, but I want to be able to confidently say at that time that I walked into the pulpit here as a boy, but I walked out as a man. That's what I want to be able to say one day, if God would allow it to happen.
I think we're all on various journeys of adulthood. I remember when I was in school and trying to make that transition, and sometimes you make those questionable decisions, and you now have the benefit of a few more years, and you think, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
And you have to know that when you make those decisions at that time, you're dealing with stuff that you know that you have faced, and the stuff that you haven't faced yet, you have no way of knowing. I've said this before, failure is how we learn.
Oh, yeah.
Those lessons sometimes are hard.
Oh, yeah.
But they are still valuable nonetheless.
Oh, yeah.
And yes, I've seen a maturity over the years, and a lot of folk doesn't really know that you and I had gotten together several times before you actually came.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so kind of had a little preview of what we were getting. Randy had talked with me a few times about the logistics of how we're going to get this sermon preached and all
Oh,
that.
yeah, because COVID was going on.
Oh, yeah. It was.
And shout out to Joe Youngblood, the interim pastor before me. There weren't very many people attending. And I remember watching online and thinking, man, it's a ghost town down there in Gaston. And it was. It really was. A huge absence of young people, even before COVID, not a ton of young people. I remember our first Sunday here, I'm getting into 2021, our first Sunday here, there was one child in the Sunday school department. And that was Riley Davis, who Mike and Shelby bring faithfully.
Right.
So it's been quite the journey, but I remember our first few conversations. I remember you and I went out, and did we eat at Murray's? Is that what we did?
Believe we did.
I don't remember, but you took me around, and I knew I didn't have a lot. It was a Monday, and I knew I didn't have a lot of time because I had class that night.
You had class that evening
at 6:30 or 6 o'clock or something, and I got down here, drove down here 2.5 hours, and I had to drive back. That's what a lot of people don't remember. First 3 months I was here, I was driving back. I was driving to Anderson 3 times a week.
Yep.
And if you've ever made the trek from Gaston to Anderson, it is a 2-hour, 45-minute trek. It is not a straight shot up 26 like it is to Greenville. So that was a challenge. I remember some of the senior adults at the time who have gone to be with the Lord, they got a fit out of that. They They couldn't believe I was driving that much and doing all that. And I remember one of them said, well, I just wish you could come visit me. I said, I'm sorry, I got class in 10 minutes. I'm not going to be able to make it today. You know, the challenges that came with that. But any questions you have on the overview before we end this one and then look forward to next week?
I think one of the questions that I would ask, and it's probably going to be something we'll want to talk about again next week, is,
Sure.
How do you feel now that we're into this? Have you seen us grow?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that is
That's a good question.
more important on your report card
Yeah.
is how we've come along.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Both collectively and personally.
Yeah.
So, how do you see our relationships? I think that's something that we probably should look at every year, really.
Yeah.
To say, okay, what are we doing? What have we learned as a congregation,
Yep.
as a church, in totality, and how we put that into practice?
Let's kick episode 50 off with that. I think that I'm going to think on that, and I think that is an excellent question that I'd like to expound upon. So, all right, guys, you got a little overview of the pastoral anniversary. We've been here 4 years this month. And so thank you guys so much for tuning in to episode 49. We're going to pick back up on this next week. So make sure you tune in to episode 50. This has been the Menorah Podcast, the podcast that seeks to share the light, speak the light, and send the light of Jesus Christ all across the airwaves of the internet. Thank you for tuning in. Subscribe on the YouTube, subscribe on the Buzzsprout, and we will see you next Thursday.
Bye-bye, guys.